The two trials of Joseph Adkins and Jesse Fields are often less than a paragraph when others have spoken about them. We have decided to give their trials and testimonies a little bit more airtime than that. There was a lot of drama that went on with the court of Judge Hall and the Kentucky Court of Appeals concerning this particular case. We could not leave the Judge Josiah Combs murder to go unanswered. While his assassination will be the last death reported in this feud, it almost led to Perry County once again being split up into two different factions in which state troopers had to be summoned to settle everyone down once again. There is also a lawsuit brought by the widow of Judge Josiah Combs that we will go over in our next video. This lawsuit will also spur onward the widow Markham, who will also sue in the bloody Breathitt County War. We have said a couple of times now on social media, when you get into all of the different feuds of the Appalachian Mountains, you will find in one way or in another way that they are all interconnected. And there is a lot of the French Eversole Feud that overlapped in the bloody Breathitt County War. One such example is the testimony of Tom Smith. While he was facing a murder trial of his own, he would testify to the plot of the assassination of Judge Combs. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seat belts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up that time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking on the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine, but it also convinces YouTube that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. Fields and Adkins. Both Jesse Fields and Joseph Adkins have been trusted and loyal men for the French faction during the entire feud. They were considered to be lieutenants of French. Because of their close association with the French faction, it was thought that the assassination of Judge Combs could not take place without the blessing of French himself. However, French denied any such connection to the plot or murder of Combs. The first trial. The Honorable William Campbell Preston Breckinridge would be retained as a lawyer for the defense. He was a prominent attorney at the time and very well known and respected for his talent as an attorney as well as an orator for the United States. He served as a Democrat in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1885 to 1895. He was the first cousin of Vice President John C. Breckinridge. The trial would begin on Monday, December 10, 1894, in Judge Hall's courtroom in Hazard, Kentucky. Present at the court were two defendants, Adkins and Fields, but Frazier was not present. All would not go as planned. According to the Hartford Republican in Hartford, Kentucky, December 14, 1894, quote, lawless in Kentucky. On Monday, Circuit Judge Hall was holding court at Hazard, Perry County, and the first case was the Commonwealth against Jesse Fields and Joe Adkins, friends of the French gang in the French Eversole Feud. 3 months ago, Fields and Adkins murdered an old man named Combs and were held over under $2,000 each, which they executed. They came into trial on Monday heavily armed and had many friends in the courthouse also armed. Fields told the judge when he took the stand that they were not going to jail and that they would kill the sheriff first. The trial proceeded, and the judge told the men that they must go to jail and ordered the sheriff to take them. Fields drew his pistol and fired at Judge Hall. The judge ran, and several court officers caught Fields and prevented his shooting again. The two desperados left the courthouse, and when on the outside, fired several shots into the house, fatally wounding an Eversole. They laid in a supply of whiskey and went off into the hills, unquote. There is nothing that we could find stating that Judge Hall was wounded in this shooting attempt. However, we can surmise that when Fields began shooting, people scattered. Thankfully, more people were not shot in the chaos, as the court officers had taken hold of Fields, and he was not able to do more shooting in the courthouse. But we don't have any information on how Fields was able to escape their grasp and leave. Troops in Hazard. Kentucky Governor John Y. Brown would swiftly send troops to settle down the area. This is taken from several newspaper articles, including from the Morning News from Savannah, Georgia, December 15, 1894, The Times, Richmond, Virginia, December 15, 1894, and the News and Observer, Raleigh, North Carolina, December 15, 1894. Quote, Troops ordered to Hazard. The French Eversole War breaks out again in Kentucky. Frankfort, Kentucky, December 14th. Governor Brown has ordered Colonel E. N. Gaither of the 2nd Kentucky Regiment to repair to Hazard, Perry County, where the French Eversole War has broken out again. The governor is in constant telegraph communication with the scene of the trouble. The trouble grows out of the shooting in the courthouse when Judge Hall narrowly escaped being killed. Jesse Fields and Joe Adkins, who caused the trouble in the courtroom, are still in the mountains and are armed to the teeth. Lexington, Kentucky, December 14th, 11:30 p.m. A telegram received here tonight states that the story of the trouble in Judge Floyd Hall's court in Perry County has started by a Lexington patent machine vendor. It says that Judge Hall was conducting court at Hazard and that Joseph Adkins and Jesse Fields, charged with the murder of ex-county Judge Combs, were released on bond, unquote. The court would transfer their case to the court in Barbourville, Kentucky. It was felt that this would be a safer option to keep down the atmosphere as it was once again building in lawlessness in Perry County. And, as an added precaution, troops would be summoned to guard the safety of the court in Hazard, Kentucky. We also have no more information as to who the Lexington patent machine vendor was or how he started the fight in the courtroom. Trial in Barbourville, Kentucky, and the prosecution witnesses. There would be two significant testimonies that would be presented to the court. The first one is the testimony of Mrs. Susan Eversole, the widow of Joseph C. Eversole. According to the Paducah Daily Sun, Paducah, Kentucky, on December 23, 1896, quote, saw the shot fired by Joe Adkins that killed her father. Barbourville, Kentucky, December 23. In the case of the Commonwealth versus Joe Adkins yesterday, Mrs. Susan Eversole, wife of Joe Eversole, was called to the witness stand. Mrs. Eversole says that she was standing at her father's front door and heard the shot that killed him. She looked in the direction where her father was standing, about 30 yards away, and I saw Joe Adkins with a gun presented in the direction of her father. His face was black, like a coal miner. She went to her father and caught the blood from the wound, which she held in her hand, and said, quote, Joe, you have killed my father. Don't shoot any more, unquote. While the testimony of Mrs. Eversole was going on, people in the courthouse wept. The Commonwealth closed their testimony at 10:30, and the defense asked until 1 p.m. to consult, unquote. According to the semi-weekly Interior Journal dated December 25, 1896, quote, Mrs. Joe Eversole testified at Barbourville that she saw Joe Adkins shoot her father, Judge Combs, unquote. Her testimony must have been terrible for the defense attorneys to ask for a recess to confer with their clients, but her testimony would not be the worst of it. The confession of Tom Smith. While the newspaper clipping of Tom Smith's trial is very extensive, we will dive more into what it says in the story of the bloody breath at war. We will only cover the part of his confession concerning the assassination of Judge Josiah Combs. Several newspapers covered the trial, conviction, and confession of Tom Smith. However, we are taking this snippet from the News Herald of Hillsborough, High County, Ohio, on July 4, 1895. It is believed that since Tom Smith knew that he was going to the gallows, he wanted to meet the hereafter with a clean slate and a clear soul. Quote, John Adkins and I lit out for Joe Eversole, and Joe shot him and Nick Combs. I shot at them as they fell, and then robbed Eversole's body of $30. John McKnight was the next man I killed. I shot him in the fight at Hazard. Bob Brothers was also shooting at him at the time, and it may be he that killed him. Jack Combs and I killed Robert Cornell next. He was cutting saw logs when I came upon him. I shot first. We killed him because he belonged to the Eversoles. I was at Jesse Fields and heard Fulch French, Joe Adkins, Boone Frazier, Mrs. Fields, and Jesse Thorpe make the plot to kill Judge Josiah Combs, and afterward heard Adkins say that he fired the shot that killed him. French offered me money, but I never hired to him. Yes, he gave me clothes." Unquote. A little bit of housekeeping here. Robert Cornell could have been Robin Cornett. The Appalachian accent can be misunderstood by people outside of the mountains and is not used to the dialect. Also, Smith was under a murder charge for the death of Dr. John E. Rader of Breathitt County. He states that he could have also participated in the assassination of Combs, but he was wounded from a duel that he had with a town marshal man on the streets of Jackson, Kentucky. Smith also confesses to participation in the murders of Shade Combs. Even though his confession really had no legal standing with the trial of Atkins and Fields, it did help to convict the two men of the charges. By explaining how each of the murders took place, it made the prosecution's case much easier for the jury to understand. Smith's confession also named French as being the leader and giving his blessing to each of the murders. This caused French to be arrested, charged, and acquitted for the murders at a later date. The defense takes the stand. According to the Hazel Green Herald, Hazel Green, Wolfe County, Kentucky, May 2nd, 1895. Quote, The Herald. Spencer Cooper, editor. The Fields-Atkins trial. The Commonwealth in the Fields-Atkins case closed its testimony at Barbourville last week with a dramatic scene by the widow of Joseph Eversole, a daughter of Judge Combs, whom Atkins and Fields were charged with having killed. Colonel Breckinridge, for the defense, stated that the case of his clients to the jury. Fields and Atkins both swore to an alibi and corroborated each other in the principal part of their evidence. Fields was the first witness. Atkins was next placed on the stand, but failed to corroborate the statement of Fields as to their whereabouts on September 28th, the day that Judge Combs was killed. Both testified that they were in Breathitt County that day, some 30 to 35 miles from the scene of the tragedy. The evidence so far has been very conclusive as to Atkins' guilt, but the Commonwealth has failed to connect Fields in any direct way with the killing. It seems as if most of the witnesses were afraid to divulge any more of the matter than they were compelled to do. One witness for the Commonwealth testified to having seen Marion French, son of B.F. French, in Hazard the morning that Judge Combs was killed. The prosecution claimed that it would be able to show that young French was there to carry out a contract that his father had made with Fields and Atkins. Andy Turner was the first witness introduced by the Commonwealth. He stated that he saw Jesse Fields some 5 or 6 miles below Hazard on Sunday morning of the killing. Newt Barker of Hazard testified that he saw Marion French, son of B.F. French, the Saturday evening before the killing, and also saw him in Hazard Sunday morning a few moments after Judge Combs was killed. Then Reuben Baker, who was at the time jailer of Perry County, stated that he formed a party to pursue the persons who had killed Judge Combs and was positive that he saw Jesse Fields about 5 miles below Hazard on that morning and thought that at the time Fields was wounded. Chester Eversole, the 10-year-old son of Joseph C. Eversole, testified on the morning his grandfather was killed, he was standing at the doorway of the residence of Judge Josiah Combs and saw his grandfather shot, and also saw Joe Adkins fire the fatal shot from behind a post in the garden. After the prosecution closed its principal evidence, Colonel Breckinridge moved that the court give the jury peremptory instructions to acquit Fields, but the motion was overruled. Barbourville Correspondence, Courier-Journal, unquote. Both Fields and Atkins would be convicted of the crime of murder and sentenced to life in prison. They would appeal this conviction. Appeal. This story comes out of the Wichita Daily Eagle, Wichita, Kansas, January 17, 1896. The Elam Miner, Elam, Minnesota, January 22, 1896. And the Salt Lake Herald, Salt Lake City, Utah, January 18, 1896. Quote, Frankfort, Kentucky, January 16th. The Court of Appeals today reversed the life sentence of Jesse Fields and Joe Adkins of Perry County, who were sentenced for the murder of County Judge Combs. The main grounds given in a lengthy opinion by Judge Grace are, in brief, that the defendants were not given power to bring their witnesses from the county where the tragedy occurred, and these witnesses, with material evidence, were not present. Unquote. The second trial. According to the semi-weekly Interior Journal, Stanford, Kentucky, July 28, 1896. Quote, the second trial of Joe Adkins and Jesse Fields for the murder of Judge Combs will be called at Barbourville today. This newspaper clipping comes from the Morning Times, Washington, D.C. on January 2, 1897. Quote, life sentence for Adkins, Louisville, Kentucky, January 1st. At Barbourville, Joe Adkins, a member of the French faction of the French Eversole Feud fame, was convicted and given a life sentence for the brutal murder of Judge Josiah Combs at Hazard, Perry County, Kentucky. Combs was the father-in-law of Joe Eversole, leader of the faction bearing his name, and the murder of the old man was the last of a long series of homicides resulting from the feud. Unquote. According to the book Kentucky Famous Feuds and Tragedies by Charles G. Musenberg. The trial ended with Jesse Fields being acquitted and Joseph Adkins receiving a life sentence. Adkins did not spend long in prison as he was released later under mysterious circumstances. Just a few years later, Jesse Fields would soon meet his fate as feuding would be the cause of his downfall. The death of Jesse Fields. Another death of a person who has been active in the French Eversole feud was reported at the Hazel Green Herald, Hazel Green, Kentucky, on May 3, 1900. It states the following. Quote, another killing in Breathitt. On Tuesday, April 27th, just after dusk, Jesse Fields was shot near Cornett's store on Smith Branch in Breathitt County, 6 miles from Jackson, by Moses Feltner, and died about 2 o'clock a.m. Jesse Fields took an active part in the French Eversole feud in Perry County a few years ago. At the time of his death, he was under indictment and bond to answer at the next term of court for the shanty boat tragedy on the Kentucky River near Jackson, which occurred a short time ago. Unquote. We have one less trial to cover in our next video pertaining to the Widow Combs versus French and the death of Benjamin Fulton French, which ends the French Eversole feud in Perry County, Kentucky. The feud does spill over into Breathitt County, and we will cover that part of the story in later videos. Thank you. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series, The Appalachian Feuds. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notification. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries of Appalachian history.